Good afternoon. I'm sitting in a restaurant, so there may be some background noises, but I thought on this 24th of September, known as King Shaka Day, I should say something about why the African Radical Economic Transformation Alliance has felt so strongly throughout that we must concentrate on what we believe are the correct ideological foundations of our liberation struggle. And at the same time, why we feel so strongly about dealing authentically with the question of history. The liberation struggle in South Africa does not date back from just a century. It goes back much, much further. Also in terms of the liberation wars, the anti-colonial wars and land wars that had been fought by the indigenous people of South Africa against their oppression, their exploitation, and the manner in which the colonists were stealing the land at gunpoint. It is in that context that obviously King Shaka stands central, and the manner in which the Zulu nation fought against the colonial oppressors of the United Kingdom. So I've always felt, and so does the National Working Board of ARETA, that it was a huge mistake during the negotiations for a democratic South Africa to have agreed that King Shaka Day should be renamed and called Heritage Day. We must be authentic to our history. For centuries, since 1828, after King Shaka passed on, the 24th of September was recognized as King Shaka Day and celebrated as such, and King Shaka was honored on that day. There's absolutely no historical reason why we should have changed this day. In fact, it was something which had been done as part of a negotiating process that reflects some of the many mistakes that we made during the negotiations. You see, there's an old saying that says, what you do and the authenticity and integrity in which you do things are reflected in everything, the small and the big things that you do. And I'm not saying renegotiating King Shaka Day to become Heritage Day was a small thing. It was one of those big mistakes, but it reflected even a bigger mistake in terms of the manner in which the negotiations took place, which led to a situation where so many unpalatable, sell-out compromises had been made with regards to our economic approach to the South African situation, to the fact that we eventually rejected the central concept of the nationalization of the big industries and also the mining industry in South Africa, in the manner that we rejected through the adoption of Section 25 of the Constitution and accepting property rights, the integral right that the indigenous people of this country have to the land, the way in which we institutionalized land theft by having recognized that property rights should be enshrined in our Constitution. And similar to what was done with King Shaka Day, we also made an unpalatable and unacceptable compromise with regards to Sharpeville Day, which we then said would be called Day of National Reconciliation. I say we because at that stage I was still a member of the African National Congress. I was fundamentally opposed to both these compromises that I've just referred to, and of course the overall compromises that had been made with regards to accepting new liberal economic policies, including also allowing the sunset clauses to be introduced that protected the apartheid apparatchik administrators and gave them jobs for years afterwards, which they never deserved. So in this context, the African Radical Economic Transformation Alliance this morning issued a short statement in which we said we do not recognize this day as Heritage Day. We recognize it as it should be, as it should historically be, as King Shaka Day. And we will celebrate it as such. We said that anything else would lack integrity. We did emphasize, and I think it's important to emphasize it in this short live video again, that we do not undermine the various cultures and various nations of our country and their right to be fully recognized and to be part of our nation. And the recognition of King Shaka Day certainly does not fly in the face of such. But we do believe that under all circumstances, we must act with historical integrity. We must recognize the true history of our country. We should not allow ourselves, and we should not have allowed ourselves to be pressurized to have changed that history and to call King Shaka Day Heritage Day, or to call Sharpeville Day Day of National Reconciliation. That is historically incorrect. It is an anomaly. It is a whitewash. And I very, very specifically refer to it as a whitewash, because having been part of the negotiating process, having followed what was going on, it was evident that there was a lot of pressure primarily from those in the white community and within white monopoly capitalism for these unpalatable compromises to have been made. The time had come for us as a nation to stand firm in recognizing our culture, in recognizing our true history of liberation struggles and wars against colonialism, and that those wars were very directly related under all circumstances also to the ownership of the land. We cannot and should not allow ourselves to sugarcoat this history. It must be recognized, it must be honored, and we must celebrate our history, both our victories and also our pain, the humiliation, the suffering that our people had been subjected to. Thus, we must celebrate King Shaka. We must celebrate the great wars against colonialism and for the fight of the land that he led. We must also acknowledge the pain that our people suffered at the hands of the apartheid regime, the terrible killings at the Sharpeville police station. Out of those killings, out of that history, comes a true understanding of the real struggle that we are fighting and that we have to continue fighting. If we do not recognize our history, we become like a tree without roots. And in these storms that we find ourselves now, the storms of imperialism, of the continuation of white monopoly capital control over our economy, the selling out of the African National Congress under the leadership of Cyril Ramaphosa, that has turned it into a comprador capitalist organization. All of those things fall into place. One can begin to understand them when you understand the history of struggle of the people against the oppression of white monopoly capitalism and colonialism. Because yes, certainly, White monopoly capitalism has morphed, has developed out of colonialism. It has the same historical roots, and it continues to play the same role of the exploitation and subjugation of the indigenous black and especially African people of South Africa. History must be our map, our guiding institution, which we must never reject. And ideology must be our compass that will help us to interpret that historical map and come to the right conclusions. And certainly the right conclusion now, on this 24th of September, 2023, is that we must stand up and fight. We must fight the comprador ANC capitalists. We must fight the white monopoly capitalists. We must fight the imperialists. We must come together as an indigenous people, as black and especially African people, forge unity and work for our true liberation, which must include, as King Shaka so clearly knew when he conducted those wars against the British colonists, which includes always the right to the land, the ownership of the land, because it is the land that shapes us. It is the land that gives us our roots. It is on the land that we will build our economic strength and independence. And with that message and that commitment of celebrating King Shaka Day, celebrating also Sharpeville Day, and acknowledging and respecting and upholding our history, I greet you with the usual slogan of the African Radical Economic Transformation Alliance, Aluta.